So starting with Floriana, so we're really delighted to be hosting you for the last couple of months here at the University of Galway. Floriana is from the University of Padua in Italy, and she earned her doctoral degree at the University of RomaTre in Italy, and also the Sorbonne University in Paris in France. And the project she'll be speaking about today comes out of the research she carried out during her doctoral studies. She's also worked as a researcher on medieval vernacular texts at the École Nationale des Chartes and at the Institut de Recherche et d'Histoire des Textes in Paris. And she's also currently a member of, am I saying this correctly, RIALFrI? The RIALFrI project, sorry, thank you, at the University of Padua. So welcome, Floriana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emily, for your introduction and for your constant help during this week. Thank you, Ivona, as well. And thank you all for being here this morning in this room and on Zoom. I'm happy to talk about my personal research project because it's very important to me. It represents the outcome of my doctoral studies. And for this digital edition, I've started from scratch without any concrete digital skill. So my aim was to work directly on documents and learn by doing. And I want to thank also the researchers and the colleagues who shared their time and expertise with me and gave me valuable pieces of advice in order to progress. So this morning, you are going to see mostly a work in progress with some results, of course, but also with some failures and some gaps yet to be filled. But I want to share all with you because I think it's going to be useful for our discussion and for the improvement of my own research. So thank you in advance for your attention. And here we go. Anseïs de Carthage is an early 13th century chanson de geste that narrates the history of the eponymous protagonist, who you can see in the miniature, who is a young nephew of Charlemagne. After the war with the Saracens, so after the Roncesvalles events, Anseïs is proclaimed the new king of the Iberian Peninsula and entrusted with the governance of the territories conquered by his uncle, the emperor. This epic poem belongs to the Carolingian branch of medieval epics, specifically the Cycle du Roi, and represents a narrative continuum with the Chanson de Roland, despite having been composed several centuries later. Anseïs de Carthage was originally composed in Old French and comprises decasyllabic lesses of rhymed and assonant verses, amounting to over 10,000 verses in total. This is the manuscript tradition of Anseïs, and the list of witnesses, as you can see, is organized according to the country that currently retains each of the manuscripts. So the poem is preserved in 4 complete manuscripts, indicated by capital letters, A, B, C, and D, all in France. 1 incomplete manuscript, U, which actually is a cephalus, so its initial section is absent, likely a quaternion, and some fragmentary manuscripts, which only contain only a few hundred verses of the original poem. This chanson de geste was written in Old French. However, the peculiarity of its tradition lies in the existence of a Franco-Italian branch, highlighted in the slide, so manuscript C and fragment of Imola. And this branch dates approximately 1 century later than all the other manuscripts. And actually, there are 2 more fragments F, and H, but they have been lost over the years. And at present, we only have their transcription made in 1835 by Franz Joseph Mohn for fragment F, and by Vincenzo de Bartolomeis in 1932 for fragment H, which was written in Franco-Italian. And from the 19th century onwards, Anseïs de Carthage attracted academic interest due to its connection with the chanson de Roland. However, this interest soon turned into criticism when scholars began labeling Anseïs as a minor text in medieval Old French epic literature, considering it neither fascinating nor original. Of course, I disagree. So consequently, there has been only one published edition of Anseïs de Carthage, dating back to 1892, which follows very different philological criteria compared to today. For example, Johann Alton selected manuscript A as the Codex Optimus, adjusting the phonomorphological aspects of the poem to obtain a flawless text in order to adhere to an idealized notion of standard Old French. And as a result, he published a version of Anseïs that never actually exists. Furthermore, the critical apparatus often fails to record all the readings of the manuscript tradition. In the 90s, a century after Alton's edition, two other scholars, Alexander Kerr from University of Reading and Roberta Mori from University of Bologna, presented a critical edition in their doctoral thesis. However, this work remained unpublished. And more recently, in 2022, Julien Fleurin, a PhD candidate at the University of Lille, published his new critical edition of Anseïs de Carthage, which is accessible in an open French repository for doctoral thesis. And once again, this edition is based only on manuscript A, but at least it aims to record all the substantial readings found in other witnesses. And generally, in their editions, scholars haven't fully considered the Franco-Italian branch of the manuscript tradition due to its peculiar linguistic aspect. And this represents a significant gap in scholarly research about this epic poem, both from a literary and a linguistic perspective. And here you have some information about the Franco-Italian branch of Anseïs, which represents an important part of the manuscript tradition because Codex C is one of the 4 manuscripts containing the complete text of the chanson de geste. And furthermore, along with fragment A and the lost fragment H, it attests the rapid spread of this chanson de geste in Italy. And here you have the first folio of manuscript C. And as you can see, Anseïs de Carthage doesn't begin on folio 1 recto, but rather on folio 53 recto. And this is because in the codex prior to Anseïs de Carthage, there is a copy, also in Franco-Italian, of another Carolingian chanson de geste, called the chanson d'Aspremont. The text is transcribed in a usual medieval Gothic script, and the layout is a traditional one for epic poem, comprising 2 columns. It's a modest manuscript, as you can see, lacking any miniature in the Anseïs de Carthage section. And this is a portion of the bifolio containing the fragment of Imola. And as you can see, the parchment is severely damaged, and the text in some instances is completely illegible. This is due to the fact that the parchment was reused as a cover for a notarial protocol at the beginning of the 17th century. This fragment was studied in 1886 by Monica Longobardi, an Italian scholar. But on the other hand, Codex C remains unpublished, so it's an unexploited source of information about a specific historical linguistic reality. In fact, medieval Europe was a multilingual reality in which one of the main languages, Old French, was spoken and written widely in commercial and cultural environments inside and outside of France. This linguistic reality can be described as a medieval francophonie, a sort of transnational community of all the French speakers and writers. In each area of this extensive linguistic community, Old French was naturally influenced by local languages and mixed with them, producing code mixing phenomena and linguistic hybridization. And in Italy, particularly in the northeast of the country, Old French was used as a lingua franca, mixing with the various local vernacular languages. And more specifically, Old French encountered what has been defined as the Northern Italian Koine, a sort of a supra-regional common language characterized by linguistic features shared among all the local linguistic varieties. This huge contact gave rise to a specifically literary phenomenon which led to emergence of Franco-Italian literature. And considering all these aspects, when attempting to define the Franco-Italian language, it's possible to distinguish between two categories. French in Italy, which refers to the process of transcribing French text, and the French of Italy, which refers to the production of text in French by Italian authors. When medieval Franco-Italian texts were discovered in the early 19th century, scholarly criticism considered them inferior due to their peculiar linguistic aspects. And this prejudice persists for a considerable period until the re-evaluation of Franco-Italian literature after the mid-20th century. And over the past few decades, several studies have been conducted with the aim of defining this peculiar phenomenon of medieval literature. And perhaps too much focus has been placed on finding an appropriate label there rather than on the concrete analysis of the text. Many classifications have been proposed, but all have proven somewhat unsatisfactory because they often disregard the linguistic reality of the text, which remain understudied. However, in no classification proposed so far, we can identify these three major categories, even though I'm summarizing and simplifying a lot. So, copies, French text transcribed by Italian scribes, rewritings, French text modified by Italian writers, and finally, new text, original works written in French by Italian writers. And the Franco-Italian Anseïs de Carthage belongs to the first category of this grouping, as it's likely a copy transcribed by Italian hand, which intervene mainly at a phonetic and morphological level. Considering all that, it seems crucial to focus on the documents and text to get as much data as possible to analyze. In the specific case of Anseïs de Carthage, the first requisite is the production of a critical text. The version of the chanson de geste contained in manuscript C requires a comprehensive eidetic study and a collation with the fragment, the Italian fragment. And in addition to serving as a final reference tool, the critical text will be the essential basis for subsequent level of analysis. For instance, linguistic analysis, paleographic, literary. And for the addition of features such as lemmatization, glossary, index of anthroponyms and toponyms. And in order to satisfy these research needs, I have decided to use the XML-TI standard to ensure the text searchability and interoperability. And here's a brief overview of my project path, which can be resumed in these three main phases. So the transcription of manuscript C in my PhD thesis was initially transferred from PDF format to XML-TI format using a regular expression to maintain the verse structure. And then during my fellowship here in Galway, I began the process of coding the various textual elements that I was interested in. And finally, I also attempted to use a tool for visualization and rendering, which is known as EVT. EVT is an open source interface developed by a group of students from the University of Pisa in Italy and coordinated by Professor Roberto Rosselli del Turco for the purpose of creating and rendering XML-TI editions. So, more specifically, this is the initial element of my XML document, the TI header, which contains the descriptive and declarative metadata associated with my digital resource. Currently, as you can see, it contains only some basic information, such as the title and a portion of the publication statement. However, as the research progresses, it can be further enriched with additional elements, such as the encoding description element, which explains the relationship between the digital and the documentary source, namely the encoding method. The second part of the TI header contains the source description element, which describes the documentary sources. And given that the sources in questions are all manuscripts, the elements employed are all part of the specific module designated as MS-DESC manuscript description. And here, the level of detail can also be further refined, for instance, by adding the physical description of the witnesses or the summary of their contents. And this is the visualization in EVT. And as you can see, the information entered in the XML document is organized into distinct sections, which correspond to the encoding. So we have the section about the publication, manuscript identifier, and manuscript contents. And the final section of the TI header contains a list of the manuscripts included in my document, and also a list of anthroponyms that have been tagged with the first name, personal name element. And in this section, I will soon include also the list of toponyms that will be tagged with the place name element. And here's the visualization in EVT for the list of witnesses, and the visualization of the anthroponyms. As you can see, each proper noun is displayed at the top of the page with an initial capital letter, and by clicking on it, two pop-ups will open. And the first pop-up, more info, displays all the encoded information related to a proper noun, such as his role, his job, birth and dates, and death dates. And for instance, in the case of Anseïs, who is a fictional character, the value king be entered in the role attribute or element. And the second pop-up, occurrences, contains all instances of the proper noun within the text. And furthermore, in the text visualization mode, the user can click on the proper noun highlighted by EVT, which will open the same pop-ups with the same information. And this is the principal section of my XML document, the most significant for the textual studies, as it contains the entire transcription of the Franco-Italian version of Anseïs de Carthage. In the slide, you can see the simplified structure of the text element, which is divided into three main sections: front, body, and back. The front element is used to contain any prefatory information such as introduction, preface, abstract, while the back element is used to contain any appendixes, notes, or afterwards. The front and the back elements are not mandatory, but may prove to be a valuable addition as the research progresses. The body element is required to contain a single unified text at a time. The different textual parts are enclosed within the generic div element, which means text division, and they are encoded based on the nature of the text being analyzed. In the case of Anseïs de Carthage, the PB and CB elements, so page break and column break elements, have been employed to include information regarding the layout into columns, as we have seen before. The N attribute has been inserted into these elements to indicate the folio number and the left or right column on the page. And furthermore, the XML ID attribute has been added to the page break element, and this is very useful for identifying each folio and cross-referencing it with other elements. Additionally, the fax element or the fax attribute has been included to link the folio to the corresponding image reproduction. And finally, the division into lessons has been displayed through the LG element, so line group element, using the attributes type and N in Roman numerals. And finally, each line of the manuscript is represented by an L element, so line element, which is numbered using the standard N attribute and individually identified with the XML ID attribute. And here's a sample of the rendering in EVT of the structure described in the previous slide. It shows the verso of folio 87 of manuscript C and the corresponding portion in the Italian fragment. A significant part of textual study in the field of medieval manuscript naturally focuses on abbreviation and their interpretation. The TEI standard permits the differentiation between diplomatic and interpretative levels. In the slide, you can see the basic encoding of these two levels, exemplified by the French adjective grand, abbreviated with the tilde above the vowel A. The corresponding elements between the two levels have been highlighted in the same color, and it's imperative that the interpretation of abbreviation be enclosed within the choice element, which indicates the editor intervention. These are the elements. Orig is original form, so the form of the manuscript as it was originally written. Abbreviation, the form of the manuscript in which the text has been abbreviated. And AM, abbreviation marker, So any letter or sign of abbreviation which have been omitted or replaced in the expanded form of the abbreviation. And for the interpretative level, the regularization element, so the reading that has been normalized by the editor, the expansion of the abbreviation, and EX, the editorial expansion, which means letters added when expanding the abbreviation. The two levels can be encapsulated within a single choice element, as has been done here for my project, to avoid having two separate documents, one for the diplomatic edition and one for the interpretative edition. So the following example illustrated the integration of the two levels, and here's the rendering in EVT. As you can see, unfortunately, at present, it's not possible to differentiate between the interpretative and diplomatic level in the text mode. Therefore, the two sequences are presented in a consecutive manner, lacking any recognizable differentiation. And another feature that I wanted to encode was the alignment of the fragment and the corresponding textual portion in manuscript C. As I've shown previously, an XML ID attribute was inserted in each line element to facilitate linking of verses. However, this approach proved ineffective, prompting the use of the app critical apparatus element, which is supported by EVT. So the app element was employed in conjunction with two distinct reading elements, RDG, each referencing manuscript C and the fragment. As you can see, this is indicated in the witness attribute. And this led to the following structure, and this is the rendering. This first attempt was unsatisfactory because the interface doesn't display any content within the text area on the left. Instead, the two distinct readings are visible within the right window. And this occurred because in my encoding, the two reading elements were placed at the same level, which resulted in the system being unable to identify the preferred reading for the critical text. So I changed the encoding and used the lemma element to select the desired reading within the text. And here, the rendering in EVT. The verse is displayed at its original place in the text on the left, and then the different readings are listed in the right window. And finally, here's an example of the use of the app and lemma element and the reading elements to encode a single textual reading, not an entire verse. This is the result in EVT. As you can see, in the left window, the base reading is highlighted, and in the right window, all the information from the apparatus is correctly displayed. As well as abbreviation, several other writing phenomena are also evident in a manuscript. And in the sample that I present today, for example, I found two scribal errors. In the first case, at the beginning of a verse, the scribe transcribes a capital V, which is then modified into a capital L. And the seek element was employed to encode the manuscript reading, while the correction element was used to introduce the correction. On the same folio, a few lines below, the scribe amends another error by crossing out the incorrect word, which is an Italian word, colpo, and writing the correct one beside it. In this case, the del deletion element was employed, accompanied by the rendition attribute to specify the nature of the correction. And in order to display this writing phenomena in EVT, it's necessary to modify the JSON configuration file of the document. And this involves inserting the tag of the TI elements and the graphical display style. For instance, for the deletion element, a line through, for the seek element, bold, and for the correction, italic. Nevertheless, the consequence is the absence of a graphical rendering, as EVT does not yet support all the configurations that the user may input. The EVT group is currently working on that in order to incorporate this type of functionality also. And another element, not very important, but not yet supported by EVT, is the supplied element, which is employed to encode textual gaps in a document. And as I showed you before, the unreadability of the text in the Italian fragment is caused by material damage. This information is indicated by the reason attributes beside the supplied element. And the rendering in EVT doesn't indicate the presence of a gap. The rendering is on the left. And rather it displays the readable text inserted within the line element. At the bottom on the right, I have made a manual transcription in order to compare the two rendering and to show the real extent of the gap. And lastly, I would like to show you an additional element which is inserted at the beginning of the XML document preceding the text element. Is the facsimile element which enables the linking of an image reproduction to a specific point of the encoded document. And to use the EVT interface for rendering, it is necessary to establish a link between a single reproduction of a folio and the page break element, as you can see in this slide, which can be achieved using an XML ID attribute. And this is the rendering in EVT for manuscript C and the rendering for the fragment. So the sample of work presented today represents, of course, a preliminary attempt to create a digital edition using the available tools. For this presentation, I've tried to use a TI Publisher, an open source toolbox produced directly by the TI consortium. As stated on the website, as you can see, the software offers several key features and supports the entire TE standard tag set. The users can customize the structure and the rendering of their work directly into the XML document. I've tried to install a TI Publisher, but unfortunately I have encountered technical problems that I was unable to resolve, and therefore I'm seeking assistance from the TI Publisher community to solve the problem. So see you next time. And in the next stage of my work, I will focus on two main goals. The encoding of the entire edition and the addition of features that will allow me to deepen the linguistic study of the Franco-Italian version of Anseïs de Carthage. So more specifically, lemmatization and linguistic analysis, glossary indexes. A scholarly edition is not merely an edition of a text. It's a digital document that simultaneously is enriched on several levels. It's actually a comprehensive digital study of an historical source, encoded in a searchable and interoperable standard. And here are the basic encodings I would like to use for the features to be added. And regarding lemmatization, this is the encoding proposed by the PIRA lemmatizer developed at the École Nationale des Arts in Paris and currently employed by the RIALFrI group in Padua. In PIRA, the text is initially tokenized and then lemmatized. Each token, as you can see, is encoded with the word element and a series of attributes. The XML, ID, and N attributes are employed to identify and number the token, while the POS attribute indicates the part of speech, and the MSD attribute contains the morphosyntactic description. For the glossary and for indexes, I plan to start with a basic encoding approach consisting of the entry and form elements for the glossary and the index and term elements for the indexes. The TE standard permits the encoding of text at a very fine and precise level. You could even tag every letter of a text if you want, but of course this would be a time-consuming task. Nevertheless, the possibility of delving into such detail would prove beneficial in the context of linguistic hybridization. Franco-Italian texts indeed present several degrees of hybridization, a phenomenon that has been recently interpreted by some scholars through the lens of a contemporary linguistic category, which is code mixing. And the model that you see in the slide has been proposed as a potential framework for understanding the linguistic hybridization of Franco-Italian. The contact between Old French and the Northern Italian Koine, or simplifying between French and Italian in a medieval context, could occur on three different levels: phonetics, morphology, and semantics, and produce all these combinations. So the level of detail in TEI encoding can be exceptionally comprehensive. Nevertheless, the achievement of such precision still necessitates a considerable investment of human time and energy. And I believe that we researchers in the humanities need to communicate directly with the world of IT and entrust the computer with everything that can be automated to really enhance our human contribution to research. And as a final reflection, I would like to cite a quote from Roberto Busa, who in this sentence imagines an artificial intelligence speaking to human intelligence. You do not know yourself well enough, and if I, the computer, cannot serve you more, it's because you do not know how to program me, you do not know how to feed my programs with sufficient data. Thank you for your attention.